to Woman Vision TV. It's where women talk. I'm Nadia Giordana. My guest today is Caryn Sullivan. You may know of her as a columnist for the St. Paul Pioneer Press. What you don't know is the backstory. Let's go talk to her and find out what that's all about. Caryn, thank you for being here today. I'm glad you could make it.
Well, I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Well, you have such an interesting story. I'd have to say the theme is if life challenges can either take you down and make you bitter, or you can come out of it better. Is that essentially the theme we're talking about today?
That is.
Yeah. Well, let's hear something of your story and how this trail of trials came about and when it started.
Okay. Well, I have had a rather unusual life in that my challenges started very early in life with kind of a traumatic event of my mother leaving my father, and my childhood was different. We moved around and there was always something going on, and I sort of steeled myself against difficulties and powered through things without ever really getting into the emotional side of anything. Went to law school and practiced law for almost 10 years. I have that analytical mind and love to study people, study problems, come up with solutions, figure things out.
And so you put a big chunk of your life into planning your life and becoming a lawyer.
I did.
Yeah.
I did. I went to law school because I wanted to help people.
Mm-hmm.
I ended up working in insurance coverage, which was more of an intellectual exercise than I had anticipated, but sometimes you take the job that comes your way and you make the most of it. So I practiced law for nearly 10 years, and then in 1993 I was pregnant with my daughter Julia, and we discovered that my son Jack had autism. Now, if you think back to 1993, autism wasn't on the cover of magazines.
And little was known.
Very little was known. We had Rain Man, but aside from that, there really wasn't much of a context for understanding autism. Yet, I knew that the diagnosis was life-changing.
Yeah.
And so I made a decision, and I took a leave of absence from the law firm where I was practicing and became a stay-at-home mom.
Mm-hmm.
Never what I anticipated I would be.
Big change.
It was a very big change. For a long time I struggled when people would ask me, so what do you do? Like saying the words, I'm a stay-at-home mom. It was just not the way I was raised to be.
No.
I came to completely embrace it, and ultimately my husband did as well. He wasn't initially excited about it. But more importantly, I became my son's advocate. I learned everything that I could about autism. He had a lot of issues, medical and developmental challenges.
That's what mothers had to do then. They had to learn it all themselves. There wasn't much out there, and they had to become an advocate for the child.
Right, you know, the Autism Mom Warriors. So I spent a lot of time doing that, and then when my daughter was 10 years old, she became ill, and the whole world shifted in our family.
What a shock.
She had a very rare blood disorder and required a bone marrow donor. So we started with my son, because siblings are the best possible matches. Took him in and had him tested, and discovered that he was a perfect match.
Oh, fantastic. Although then there's a series of decisions that has to be made at that point.
Right, right. So it was interesting because the balance shifted in my family. Jack had always been the one who consumed so much time and attention and needed so much. And Julia was our independent child who could manage everything and did from a very young age, required very little. And all of a sudden, she required a lot. And so I like to think of this as Jack becoming the superhero who he had always, worshipped. He became our family superhero, and he saved his sister's life. So I spent a lot of time being Julia's advocate, spent tons of time at medical appointments and the hospital, and became very consumed with the caregiver role.
Oh, yeah. Now, what was the illness that she had?
She had a very rare blood disorder called paroxysmal nocturnal hemoglobinuria.
Mm-hmm.
It typically affects adults, not 10-year-old children, but it was just one of those crazy, fluky things that affected her.
Wow.
So, and I forgot to mention that before she was diagnosed, I had gone through breast cancer treatment.
Okay, I was thinking there was something else that happened in between
something.
there, the two kids. How long were you fighting that battle?
Well, here's the interesting thing. I was so consumed by Jack and then by Julia that I truly don't think of myself very often as a breast cancer survivor, and which is why I've neglected to mention it.
It just came along in the middle of all these other trials.
But the interesting thing was that I was very fortunate, Nadia. I was a stage 1 cancer patient. I did have a double mastectomy. I went through reconstruction and chemo and all of that. But the experience prepared me for being Julia's caregiver.
Okay.
Because I understood what chemo brain was. Because I'd experienced it. And I understood that feeling of isolation that she went through. I went through to a much lesser degree than she did. But I was just able to be a better caregiver for her because I had gone through that. So if you look at the world in terms of things happen for a reason, maybe that was the reason I came down with cancer first.
That's a good enough reason.
So Julia recovered, and it was a difficult few years because she had, one medical challenge after another. She was anxious to get back to sports. She played hockey, she played soccer, but in each sport she sustained a concussion, which was very worrisome.
Yeah.
And that was a few years ago before we really had all of this conversation.
It's on the news now.
Right. So she ultimately stopped playing sports and focused on her studies. And then in the middle of her sophomore year, my husband died suddenly of a heart attack. And it was just a shocking, horrible thing that happened.
Out of the blue.
Well, he'd had heart disease.
And
it was his second heart attack. The second was the fatal one. So he'd been in and out of the heart center in St. Paul, and he had 7 stents when he died at age 54.
Yeah, that's young, so still feels out of the blue when you're that young.
Well, and the out of the blue part that was so difficult was that I was in Maryland visiting my brother and his wife and their new baby. My stepdaughter Katie was living in Denver. She was about to come home for Christmas because Ted died 10 days before Christmas. My stepson Dan was in Virginia. And my son Jack was attending a boarding school in New Hampshire. So when her dad died, Julia was home alone. And she actually found out about it through a call from the nurse at the hospital.
Oh, no. Oh, that must have been hard for her. And for you.
It's one of those things that will scar me forever.
Yeah.
The conversation that I had with my daughter after she learned about her dad's death. So that was in 2009. So I talk about how at that point in my life I joined the Freakin' Widows Club.
What is that?
The Freakin' Widows Club.
Is that a real club?
I made it up. It's for those of us who find ourselves, suddenly single because we've lost our spouse in death, and it's not an actual club, but I refer to it that way. So the last 6 years have been about moving from the second career into the third career as a writer and a speaker, where I've really married my first career and my second career, bringing my curiosity and my awareness about life's challenges together with the empathy and compassion that I frankly didn't have before I went through all of these experiences with my family. And so I'm always interested in figuring things out and sharing stories about how people are navigating life's challenges and the lessons that are present in virtually every experience.
And you do speaking. Do you teach workshops or do you speak to groups?
I'm a keynote speaker, but I also do workshops. I actually speak with a woman named Janina Sitch. Together we present on dealing with ambiguous loss.
Mm-hmm.
The things that aren't so tangible.
What would be an example of ambiguous
loss could be, for example, when my son was diagnosed with autism, I had this vision before that of what life would be like with him.
Okay.
My husband had this vision of, here's my son, and I'm going to go fishing with him, I'm going to take him skiing, do these things with him in life. And because of his disorder, it's not turned out that way.
Okay.
So it's the loss of the dream.
Mm-hmm.
In Janina's case, part of the ambiguous loss was, as a police officer, she went through a lot of really difficult experiences and developed PTSD.
Okay.
And had to retire unexpectedly from her career, much as I did with my law career. And so that's the loss of your identity, just what you imagine things
the way you
would
thought
be.
life was going to be.
Right.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. As opposed to a death. I mean, that's a more concrete loss.
I think and tell me what you think, I think the grieving process for ambiguous loss is different because there isn't as concrete of a beginning and an end, an appropriate mourning period, if you're even allowed to mourn that kind of a loss.
Right. And I've actually had women say to me who have been divorced, in some ways, I think it would be easier to be a widow.
I can appreciate why they would say that, sure.
When your spouse dies, people bring meals, they bring flowers, there's a funeral, you mark this person's life and you move forward. It's not the same when you are divorced, but you still lost your spouse.
You still did. And more, your spouse, your lifestyle. Oh, widows lose that too.
Right, your friends, all of those things change. For 50% of the people who are divorced, there's an element of choice there. Someone's making that choice.
Yeah.
With the death, you don't have that choice.
Well, let's talk a little bit about perhaps the lessons that come out of all of this. I think we have about 5 minutes left. We can cover that. And a little bit about your book. We haven't talked anything at all about your book.
Okay. Well, the biggest lesson that I've learned forms the title of my book, Bitter or Better. And that lesson came about in the spring of 2010. My friend Ann, who was widowed shortly after I was, went with me to a function at St. Thomas Academy where our sons had graduated from, and I was introduced to a priest named Father Johnson. And I had an incredible amount of support from people after Ted died. The funeral was extremely well attended. We had meals. People, plowed the driveway, walked the dog, swept out the garage, did so many things for me, and I was so grateful. But there were also people who were unkind and people who disappeared. And I was very wounded by that and confused by that. And so when I met Father Johnson, I had a couple of glasses of wine, and so I, in an unfamiliar way to me, sort of unloaded all of these things to him, and I said, I don't understand why, it's the eternal question of why do the good die young? My husband was so well loved and so kind and so generous to people. And he sort of took a breath and said, Caryn, I can't explain why you've had so much adversity in your life, and I can't explain why these people have done what they've done or not done. All I can say is that in the face of adversity, we all have a choice. We can be bitter, or we can be better.
We can be better. I think that is just fantastic, and it's so true. And even though we know that on some level, don't you think we still always have to be reminded of that, especially when we're going through those trials, because that's when we forget.
Right.
That's when we start feeling the why me,
Right.
why me, why one more thing, I can't take it anymore. We have to just take those lessons and figure out a way to be better from it.
Right. And I call those words my North Star. And honestly, I haven't had any major crises since I had that conversation with Father Johnson, but every day presents some challenge, some quandary, some decision. And I constantly think about those words.
Yeah.
They're the framework, through which I process all of the things that happen to me in my life that aren't easily resolved. It was such a gift that he gave to me.
Oh, yeah, that's fantastic. Well, do you have a website where someone can go if they need more information about you
Sure.
or even want to check out your book?
It's KarynMSullivan.com.
Caryn, and I'll put it on the screen.
Okay, so Caryn with a C. Yes, and I've got information there about the book. The book is pretty widely available. It's in Barnes & Noble, and Kowalski sells
Amazon
it.
probably.
Amazon absolutely has it. I do sell it on my website. And it's available electronically as well.
Great.
If people aren't big fans of holding,
Ebook, sure.
yes.
Yeah.
So it's available that way.
Okay. Final words of wisdom.
Well, my mission now, Nadia, and my passion has become helping other people to be as mindful as I am about Father Johnson's words, and to really embrace that gift and that message. And as they go forth in their life and deal with whatever comes their way, that they too will look for the North Star and follow it.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you for coming on the show today.
My pleasure. It's been my